By the time the rain reached the black awnings of Ravenscar House, the lamps along Baltimore Harbor had melted into trembling gold. No one who passed the old restaurant after sunset called it only a restaurant. It sat at the edge of the water like a chapel built for hunger, with gargoyles above the doors, red glass in the windows, and a private room beneath the stairs where noble vampires were said to drink their coffee without steam. The man who stepped from the cab did not look like a king. His coat sagged at the shoulders, his boots were wet through, and the scarf at his throat had been rubbed thin enough to show the pale column of skin beneath it. He had dusted his silver hair with ash and bent his posture until even the doorman saw only a tired stranger who had wandered too far from the cheap lodgings near the docks. His name was Lucien Marrow, though half the eastern coast knew him as the vampire king of the Chesapeake courts. He owned the Ridge Castles, the winter clinics, the debt houses, and every candlelit dining hall where mortal politicians learned to lower their voices. Ravenscar House was his oldest public room, founded after a war humans had forgotten and vampires had turned into etiquette. Lucien had come disguised because grief had made him suspicious. Courtiers bowed too quickly, nobles praised before listening. Managers sent him reports polished so bright they reflected nothing real. After the death of his old human advisor, Thomas Wren, Lucien had begun entering his own establishments dressed as someone nobody needed to impress, asking for small things, watching who looked away. Most looked away. At the door, Peter Voss, the night host, examined Lucien from collar to boot. Behind him, the room glittered with brass rails, white linen, silver spoons, and guests whose jewels caught the candlelight like trapped stars. Several tables near the windows stood empty, but Peter folded his hands over the reservation book as if guarding a church relic. "Good evening," Lucien said, roughening his voice. "I would like something warm." Peter's smile was trained but thin. "We are fully committed tonight. Even the tables by the glass, held for expected patrons." Lucien let the silence sit between them. He could hear Peter's heart, quick with irritation rather than fear. "Coffee, then, until the rain eases." Peter sighed, glanced toward the manager's station, and pointed to a narrow table hidden behind a carved column. Coffee only. The table had been placed where expensive guests would not have to see a poor man lift a cup. Lucien sat in the half-shadow and watched servers pass as if his chair held an umbrella stand. He had chosen the humiliation, but the old sting of it still found him. Power did not make contempt unreal. It only gave a man the luxury of leaving after he had studied it. Then Elara Venn came toward him with a tray tucked against her black apron and a strand of brown hair escaping its pins. She did not hurry in the bright, anxious way of servants who had learned fear as choreography. She walked as if the room belonged to everyone standing in it. When she reached the hidden table, she looked at his face first, not his coat, not his boots, not the empty space where a gentleman's watch should have been. "Good evening," she said. "I'm Elara. I'll take care of you." Lucien heard no pity in her voice. That interested him more than courtesy. "Only coffee. We have the bitter house roast, a dark Guatemalan blend, and a chicory coffee some of the harbor workers prefer when the night has teeth." Despite himself, Lucien almost smiled. "Does the night often have teeth here?" Elara's eyes flicked, just once, to the high balcony where vampire nobles sat behind dark lace screens. "In Baltimore, sir, it would be rude to pretend otherwise." "The chicory, then," she returned with a small pot, a cup warmed properly, and 2 honey biscuits on a saucer. "I did not order those." "No," she said, setting them beside the cup. "But your hands are shaking from cold, not age. Sugar helps." "Lucien Sibdizger still. Why would you care whether I am cold?" Elara seemed honestly puzzled. "Because you are." The answer struck him with such plain force that he looked down before his eyes betrayed their old red shine. In his courts, kindness was usually wrapped in ambition. Here was a woman who had no reason to win favor from the man she believed him to be, and therefore no reason to perform goodness except that goodness had survived in her. A sharp voice cut through the hush. Elara, Vanessa Vale, floor manager and cousin to one of the court treasurers, crossed the room with a smile made for guests and eyes made for punishment. Her crimson dress matched the house drapes. Her pearls were real. Her warmth was not. "The Rosewell party has been waiting. I checked on them before I came here." Vanessa looked at Lucien as though someone had tracked mud onto her carpet. "Then stop wasting premium service on a coffee table." Elara straightened. "He is a guest. He is taking a table." Peter seated him. Vanessa lowered her voice, but Lucien heard every word. "Do not start another scene. You need this position." Elara's hand rested against the tray. Her knuckles were nicked near the thumb, old work marks half hidden by candlelight. Needing wages does not mean I forget how people should be treated. Vanessa smiled at the room, then let her smile die where only Elara and Lucien could see. We will discuss your attitude after service. She walked away. Lucien lifted the cup. The coffee was bitter, smoky, and honest. The biscuits tasted of honey and cheap flour, baked in a kitchen that knew how to make comfort from scraps. He watched Elara move through the dining room with quiet skill, calming an angry guest, replacing a dropped spoon before a nobleman could complain. Noticing an elderly human dishwasher peering through the service door with a cough he tried to swallow. Then a crash burst from the corridor. Glass scattered across tile. A young trainee named Mina Hale had slipped near the kitchen threshold where rainwater leaked under the back door. She held her hand in a towel, her first words not about pain but terror. "Please don't send me home. My mother's medicine is due tomorrow." Vanessa reached the corridor before any senior server. "This is the second breakage this week." Elara dropped to her knees beside Mina. "Look at me. Breathe slowly. Let me see." "I can still work," Mina whispered. "You can sit for 1 minute and still be brave." Vanessa folded her arms. If she cannot hold glassware, she cannot serve. Elara looked up. If the floor had been repaired when we reported the leak, she would not have fallen. "You have no authority here." "No," Elara said, wrapping the wound with a clean cloth. "But I still have a voice." An old chef named Robert Bell came from the kitchen with a first aid box and a look of weary loyalty toward Elara. Lucien stood in the doorway, unnoticed in his shabby coat, and felt something colder than rain move through him. He had come to test the humanity of others. Instead, he was beginning to suspect that his own crown had built rooms where humanity survived in spite of him. When Elara returned to the hidden table, her face was composed again, but exhaustion had left a shadow beneath her eyes. Lucien asked, "Why defend people when it costs you?" For the first time, she looked almost angry at him. Not because the question was cruel, but because it was too familiar. "Because silence once cost me more." The words were small. The room around them went on glittering. Lucien leaned back, careful not to let hunger sharpen his voice. "What did silence cost you?" Elara glanced toward Vanessa, then the balcony, then the old service door, as if measuring which walls had ears. "I refused it. That was the problem. Tell me." "No." That answer interested him even more. People did not refuse the Vampire King. Of course, she did not know she had done so. Elara lifted the empty biscuit plate. "Some men ask for stories because they want entertainment from another person's ruin. I have had enough of that." Lucien watched her leave and felt the first unfamiliar pull of shame. He had been many things in his long rule: feared, obeyed, cursed, flattered, mourned by people who did not know what else to do. But it had been years since a human woman at a hidden table had made him feel seen in the worst and most necessary way. The hunger question stayed with him through the rest of the hour. What truth had made this waitress fearless enough to risk hunger, and why did his own house seem built to punish her for it? Lucien should have left after the coffee. Instead, he remained behind the carved column while Ravenscar House dressed itself for the late court. Vampires descended from the balcony after moonrise, pale and immaculate, their laughter soft as knives laid on velvet. Humans lowered their eyes around them, and the room adjusted without anyone giving an order. Elara adjusted too, but not by shrinking. She carried silver trays into cold hands. She did not flinch when a noble woman's shadow moved wrong across the floor. When Lord Caspian Thorn tapped one clawed finger against a spoon and asked whether human servers were being trained to count, Elara simply replaced the spoon and said, "We count very well, my lord. That is why your table still has every piece it arrived with." Robert coughed once behind the service screen to hide a laugh. Lucien felt his mouth curve. The expression vanished when Vanessa appeared again, this time with Peter beside her. "The man at the column has been here too long," Vanessa murmured. "Move him out before the Harrow party arrives." Peter approached Lucien with a regret he did not feel. "Certes, we need this table." Lucien looked at the empty chairs around him. "For whom?" "A reservation. I was not told there was a time limit on warmth." Peter's face tightened. "Perhaps another establishment would suit you better." Before Lucien could decide whether to let the insult run its course, Elara set a fresh pot of coffee on the table. "This guest is still being served." Peter stared at her. "Elara, if the reservation arrives, I will move him myself to the service hearth. Until then, he has paid for a place indoors." Vanessa came close enough that her perfume soured the coffee. "You are choosing a stranger over your position." Elara's voice stayed low. "No, I am choosing the standard this house prints on its menus." Lucien turned the cup once in its saucer. Ravenscar House's motto was carved above the bar in Old Latin: warmth to the weary, dignity to the guest. He had approved its restoration after Thomas Wren died. He had never asked whether the motto had reached the staff corridor. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. After service. Yes, Elara said. After service. The Harrow party arrived near midnight in a sweep of wet cloaks and old money. At their center walked Mason Vale, royal treasurer, charity patron, and the kind of courtier who smiled as if every room had been built expecting him. He was not vampire-born, but he had fed at the edge of vampire power for years, borrowing its glamour without its restraint. Elara saw him and went still. Lucien noticed because her stillness differed from fear. It was the stillness of a person in herself not to run. Mason noticed her too. His smile widened. Well, he said loudly enough for human guests and vampires alike to hear. Elara Venn, I was told you carried trays here, but I wanted the pleasure of seeing it. Several heads turned. Vanessa's expression brightened with cruel interest. Elara folded her hands before her apron. Good evening, Mr. Vale. Would your party like the East Room? Listen to that. Professional as a clerk before she ruined herself. Mason removed his gloves one finger at a time. You used to audit royal relief accounts. Now you pour coffee for strangers by the column. Lucien's hand tightened around the cup until the porcelain nearly cracked. Elara did not answer the insult. Your coats can be taken at the host stand. Mason stepped closer. Does your daughter know why you fell so far? Does she know her mother chose scandal over security? The air changed. Even Lord Caspian stopped smiling. My daughter has nothing to do with you, Elara said. Children always inherit the cost of their parents' pride. Lucien rose. The movement was not dramatic. The chair made no sound. Yet every vampire in the room felt something ancient lift its head. Enough, he said. Mason turned toward the shabby stranger. Excuse me? You heard me. Vanessa rushed between them. Sir, you sooner to leave. Ella reached Lucien first and caught his sleeve. Her fingers were warm through the worn cloth. Come outside. He should apologize. He will not. Come outside. The urgency in her face stopped him more effectively than a guard could have done. Lucien allowed her to pull him through the side doors and under the rain-dark awning beside the alley. The harbor wind smelled of salt, coal smoke, and wet stone. Only when the doors shut behind them did Elara release his arm. You should not challenge Mason Vale. He deserved more than challenge. You do not understand what he can do. Lucien almost laughed. I understand men like him. No, she said. You understand men who threaten openly. Mason ruins people through ledgers, witnesses, letters, favors withdrawn before anyone sees his hand. Lightning showed the hard line of her jaw. She looked at him then, truly looked, and the anger in her face shifted into recognition of a different kind. You are not what you pretend to be. Lucien went very still. Elara continued, quieter. You did not look at the prices. You looked at staffing. You knew which door led to the service corridor before anyone pointed. You watched Vanessa as if you expected her to fail an exam. And when Mason spoke, the vampires in the room felt you before they saw you. If I am wearing a mask, he said, why did you serve me kindly? Because masks usually hide fear, shame, or pain. None of those makes a person less human. I am not human. I know. There it was. No scream, no flattery, no trembling plea. Only the rain between them and her breath rising white in the cold. Lucien loosened the scarf at his throat. The glamour fell from his face like mist sliding off a mirror. His hair brightened from ash gray to winter silver. His eyes took on the deep garnet glow that had made armies kneel centuries before. His hands became too still, too pale, too precise. Elara did not step back. My name is Lucien Marrow. Her face changed, first with shock, then with something far worse. The king. Yes, Ravenscar. The relief houses. The winter clinics. The royal debt office. They answer to my crown. Elara opened her satchel with hands that had begun to tremble. From between folded wage slips and a school notebook, she drew a letter protected in oilcloth. Rain spotted the corner before she covered it with her palm. Do you recognize this? Lucien took it. The seal had cracked, but the black wax bore his raven crest. The signature below the order was his own. It authorized the immediate withdrawal of Crown protection from an investigation into the Marrow Relief Trust after allegations of fraud. It froze witness stipends. It closed the kitchens that had been feeding Doc families. It left the inquiry without funds. He remembered the season vaguely. Thomas Wren had died. The court had been whispering that humans were exploiting royal charity. Mason Vale had placed stacks of documents before him and called them routine containment. Lucien had signed while grief made the world distant. Elara watched the memory reach him. Her voice dropped until it was barely louder than rain. You ruined me. 3 words. The coffee, the honey biscuits, the warm cup, the towel around Mina's hand, all of it seemed to turn in Lucien's chest like a key finding an old lock. He had expected accusation from enemies, fear from servants, performance from nobles. He had not expected a waitress to place his own signature in his hand and show him the life at the other end of it. "I did not know," he said. Elara folded the letter back into oilcloth. "That is what powerful people say when their ignorance has already eaten someone's supper." The side door opened. Vanessa's voice spilled out, sharp with impatience, then stopped when she saw Lucien unveiled. She dropped into a curtsy so quickly her knee struck stone. "Your Majesty." Elara did step back then, not from the vampire but from the confirmation that the man she had served was the power behind her ruin. Lucien looked at Vanessa without blinking. Inside, Vanessa fled. He turned to Elara. "I can reopen the investigation and return the years. Return my father's burial without debt? Return the winter my daughter learned to pretend she was not hungry because I was pretending first?" He had no answer. "I can begin," he said at last. "Begin with seeing." Elara's voice shook now but did not break. "Tomorrow, enter through the staff door. Wear the old uniform in Robert's cupboard. Wash dishes, serve tables, follow Vanessa's rules. Do not reveal yourself when someone insults you. Eat the meal they give employees. Stand until your feet hurt. Then tell me what kind of kingdom you have built." Lucien stared at her. A king in disguise had been theatrical. A king in service would be humiliation. Elara seemed to read the thought. "You asked why I defend people when it costs me, because dignity means nothing if it only belongs to those who can afford it." Lucien bowed his head. It was not a court bow. It was older than that. "I will come. Bring no guards, no glamour, and no apology that asks me to comfort you." The truth of that struck deeper than accusation. "No," Lucien said, "not that." She left him under the rain, carrying the letter and the 3 words that had made a king feel, for the first time in decades, the full weight of his own hand. Lucien entered Ravenscar House before dawn. Through the steel door beside the loading dock, an entrance he had owned for more than a century and never once used. The corridor smelled of bleach, damp wool, old onions, and the cold mineral scent of stone that had not seen sunlight since the harbor was young. Pipes groaned overhead. A bucket caught water from a crack in the ceiling with patient, humiliating rhythm. Elara was already there, tying on her apron. "You are early," she said. "I did not sleep." Hourly workers miss sleep differently. Robert Bell emerged from the kitchen carrying a folded uniform. The old chef's eyebrows lifted when he saw the king, standing without guards, jewels, or glamour. To his credit, he did not bow. "White shirt," Robert said. "Black trousers. Apron. The left cuff is torn, but the right one only looks defeated." Lucien took the clothes. "You knew? I know every face that enters my kitchen twice. Yours has been staring from coins and court portraits since my grandmother was small. And you did not report me. I report leaking pipes. No one reads those either." Elara's mouth twitched, but she turned away before Lucien could decide whether it was a smile. His first task was dishwashing. The machine had failed 3 nights earlier, though maintenance requests showed trouble for months. Lucien stood at a sink deep enough to drown a memory and scrubbed pans while steam soaked his shirt. Hot water reddened his hands. Soap found every small split in his skin. Plates arrived faster than he could clean them, then cups, then silver bowls used by vampire guests who never imagined the labor required to erase the trace of their elegance. A cook shouted for pans. Lucien moved too slowly. "Faster, moon prince," someone muttered, not knowing how close the insult came to treason. Elara reached around him, showed him how to stack by use rather than size, and placed a stiff brush in his hand. "Pride wastes time. So does pain if you pretend not to feel it. Do you give instructions to everyone this sharply? Only those who need them." By breakfast service, Lucien's back ached in a way battle wounds had never prepared him for. A vampire could heal cuts quickly, but exhaustion, he discovered, had a moral intelligence. It did not care what title a body carried. It settled where labor had been ignored. Vanessa entered the kitchen, pale from the memory of the night before, but eager to prove that the party still belonged to her in the rooms where guests could not see. Lucien had covered his face again with a simpler glamour, enough to pass as the poor stranger from the column. "The new temp," she said. "You answer to Elara." "Yes, ma'am." Robert dropped a pan with suspicious timing. Vanessa pointed at Elara. "If he embarrasses the house, the deduction comes from your wages." Lucien looked up. "For another person's error?" Elara did not let him continue. "Understood." When Vanessa left, Lucien turned to her. "That is illegal under several royal labor decrees. Then perhaps those decrees should visit the employee corridor more often." At midday, he worked the dining room. His first customer, a human banker with vampire patrons, did not look up from his ledger. "Coffee, black. Good morning. Would you like the house roast, or did I ask for conversation?" Lucien brought coffee. A drop touched the saucer. The banker pushed it away as if poisoned. "Manager." Vanessa arrived, apologized as though blood had spilled across the carpet, and removed the man's entire meal from the bill. When the banker left, she turned on Lucien. That will come out of pay. It was one drop. It was a complaint. Elara stepped between them. He is new, and you are becoming expensive. Lucien felt the old power stir beneath his ribs. One revealed word could strip Vanessa's command from her. One look could empty the room. Yet Elara had asked him to learn before using power, and the request held him more tightly than protocol. He said nothing. During break, the staff ate in a narrow room below the stairs. The table wobbled. The benches were scarred. A poster about dignity and service curled away from the wall above a cabinet stocked with stale crackers and cheap tea. Lucien sat beside Mina, whose injured hand was wrapped in clean gauze. Your mother needs medicine, he said before, remembering that a poor temp should not know it. Mina only nodded, too tired to question him. The winter clinic raised the copay again. I pick up extra shifts, but Vanessa says breaks are for people who finish prep. Elara handed Mina half her sandwich. Eat. I brought it for you, and now I am sharing it with myself through you. Mina laughed weakly. Lucien watched the exchange and felt the crown on his invisible head grow heavier. His ledgers called the clinic solvent. The human beings beneath the ledgers called it choosing between medicine and food. He looked at Elara. You were an auditor. Yes. For the Marrow Relief Trust. Until I found what Mason Vale was hiding. Robert closed the break room door. Say it properly, girl. Until you found what everyone powerful enough to stop him preferred not to see. Elara stared at her hands. Funds marked for winter kitchens were being diverted through shell charities. Medicine grants became consulting fees. Housing stipends vanished into properties owned by men who sat on charity boards. I copied records, reported them, and believed witnesses would stand with me. They did not. Some tried. Then your order withdrew protection. Witness stipends stopped. Investigators lost authority. Mason called me unstable, bitter, ambitious. He said I had forged records to cover my own theft. Doors closed. My father lost his place at the clinic. By spring, he was gone. Lucien's throat tightened. Your daughter? Marrow was little enough to ask why candles were cheaper than lamps, old enough to understand when I skipped supper. The name settled in him, Mara, a child carrying her mother's silence like a second school bag. Peter opened the door. Vanessa wants everyone upstairs. Special reservation tonight. The staff rose with the particular dread of people trained to expect punishment wrapped in instruction. In the dining room, Mason Vale stood beneath the raven crest, removing black gloves while his assistants arranged place cards. He looked at Elara first, then Lucien in the temp uniform and smiled. Perfect, Mason said. I want her serving my table, and him, the damp one. Vanessa hesitated. We have senior staff. I said I want them. After he left, Vanessa faced Elara. If anything goes wrong, this is the end of your employment. Lucien saw fear flicker in Elara's eyes, not for herself alone, for rent, for medicine, for a child waiting at home with homework under a failing lamp. He had ruled battles, treaties, and vampire councils. Yet standing in a worker's uniform while a corrupt treasurer prepared a public cruelty, he finally understood that powerlessness was not the absence of strength. It was strength trapped where the system could afford to ignore it. The evening transformed Ravenscar House back into theater. Candles multiplied, crystal shone. Piano music covered the scrape of labor from the kitchen. Mason arrived with donors, nobles, and court clerks, men and women who wore generosity like jewelry and cruelty like a private language. Elara served perfectly. Mason made sure perfection became a stage. Careful with the wine, he said. Miss Venn has a history of mishandling accounts. Soft laughter moved around the table. Lucien poured water with hands that wanted to close around Mason's chair until it splintered. And you, Mason said to him, stand straighter. Ravenscar used to hire people with pride. Lucien bowed his head. Then he saw a small figure beyond the front window. A girl in a worn school coat stood under the awning, backpack on one shoulder, rain shining in her dark hair. Elara Venn had come to meet her mother after work. Through the glass, she was watching Mason humiliate Elara before the entire room. Elara saw her daughter and nearly dropped the coffee pot. Mason followed her gaze. Ah, he said, delighted. Bring the child in. She should hear how choices echo. Something in Lucien settled. Not rage. Rage had always been easy. This was colder, deeper, and far more dangerous because it had finally learned where to stand. He placed the water pitcher on the table. Mr. Vale. Mason did not look up. What? You have mistaken cruelty for evidence. The table quieted. Vanessa hurried forward. Enough, you are dismissed. Lucien untied the apron and laid it across the back of a chair. No, Vanessa, I am not. The glamour fell. Every candle in Ravenscar House bent toward him as if wind had entered a sealed room. The vampires rose first. Humans followed because fear is also a form of education. Mason's face emptied of color. Peter dropped the reservation book. Lucien turned toward the door and opened it himself. "Elara Venn," he said gentler. "Come in from the rain." The girl hesitated only long enough to look at her mother. Then she walked across the dining room and stood beside Elara, chin lifted, though her hands shook. Lucien faced Mason before witnesses. "You will not speak another word about this child." Mason recovered enough to bow. "Your Majesty, there has been a misunderstanding." "No," Elara said quietly. "There has been an audience." And the silence after Elara's sentence spread through Ravenscar House like frost over glass. Nobles who had laughed into their wine lowered their cups. Human donors glanced at one another, suddenly careful about which side of the room might remember their faces. Mara stood beside her mother with rainwater dripping from her sleeves and her jaw set in a shape too adult for a child. Lucien did not sit. Kings often made thrones from posture alone. "Mason Vale," he said, "you will remain." Mason bowed again, deeper this time. "Of course, Your Majesty." "If my words offended Miss Venn, I offer regret for the tone. Not apology? I would never knowingly. Do not make ignorance fashionable in this room. I have worn enough of it myself." The words surprised even Lucien. They surprised Mason more. Elara looked at him, not softened but attentive. Lucien lifted his hand toward the service corridor. "Robert Bell." The old chef stepped forward, wiping flour from his fingers. "Your Majesty, last night you heard Miss Venn say she had records." "She had more than records," Mason snapped. "A kitchen employee cannot speak to court evidence." Lucien's eyes found him. A kitchen employee can speak. Whether the court has been too vain to listen is another matter. Robert disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a battered metal document case stained by smoke. Elara went pale when she saw it. "Robert, you told me to keep copies somewhere Mason's people would never search," he said. "No one with clean cuffs looks behind the flour bins." He placed the case on the table. Inside lay bank transfers, signed requisitions, clinic rosters, winter kitchen accounts, and letters written in careful, frightened hands. Elara's organization had survived poverty, scandal, and years of being called a liar. She had labeled everything, dates in words, names cross-referenced, receipts tucked behind copies, a human woman's order against a kingdom's forgetfulness. Lucien touched the top page and felt again the sting of his own signature. "These will go to an independent inquiry." Mason laughed once, sharp and false. "Stolen papers brought by a disgraced auditor and a cook. Surely Your Majesty sees the danger." Elara lifted one document. "This invoice claims a clinic delivery to Fell Street during the February freeze." "Charity logistics are complex," Mason said. The clinic on Fell Street had closed the winter before. "My father was turned away from the replacement site because the grant account had been emptied." Mara's hand slipped into Elara's. Lucien noticed the motion and felt his shame sharpen into purpose. A vampire noblewoman at Mason's table leaned over the page. Lady Evelyn Grant, old enough to remember when Lucien still smiled at councils, frowned. "The seal on this transfer is mine." Mason's face tightened. Several Cecils were replicated during that period. "No," Lady Evelyn said. "This one has the crack from my broken signet. I remember authorizing winter blankets, not consultant fees." One witness, then another. A clerk admitted the account number matched a private holding office tied to Mason's nephew. A donor recognized a letter she had never received. The room that had applauded Mason's cruelty began slowly to become the room that understood why he needed Elara small. Lucien did not feel triumphant. He felt late. "Mason Vale," he said, "you are removed from Treasury authority pending inquiry. You will surrender ledgers, keys, seals, and correspondence before leaving this building." Mason's mask cracked. "You would destroy me because a waitress made you feel guilty?" Elara answered before Lucien could. "No, your records destroy you." The line landed with such quiet finality that Mara looked up at her mother, as if seeing her restored in real time. Mason turned on Lucien. "And what of your signature? Will the court investigate the king?" Every gaze moved to Lucien. For a breath, the old instinct tempted him. Crown law gave him shelter. Grief gave him explanation. Ignorance gave him a doorway through which powerful men had escaped while calling it complexity. He looked at Elara. She did not plead. She had already told him the rule. No apology that asked for comfort. "Yes," Lucien said. The single word changed the room more than any threat. "My order withdrew protection from the inquiry. I signed it. What Mason misled me will be examined, but the harm of my hand is not erased by the emptiness of my attention. The inquiry will include the crown." Vanessa made a faint sound, as if the floor beneath her had moved. Peter stared at his shoes. Mason's anger curdled into fear. "You cannot expose the crown without weakening it." "Then the crown has been confusing secrecy with strength." Lucien ordered guards only after the evidence was sealed by 3 witnesses, including Elara. Mason left Ravenscar House without cuffs because Lucien would not make spectacle into justice, but every door on the ridge knew not to open for him without a summons. Vanessa was suspended before the candles burned out. Peter surrendered the reservation book, which revealed a pattern of seating poor guests behind columns or turning them into the rain. When the last noble departed, the staff did not cheer. They were too tired for theater. Mina cried quietly in the break room. Robert made soup because that was the language he trusted. Mara fell asleep in a chair with her head against Elara's side. Lucien stood near the kitchen threshold, uncertain for the first time in many years how to enter a room he owned. Elara looked at him over Mara's hair. "Do not begin with me. What does that mean? You want to repair a wound you can see because it has my face. Begin with the rooms that taught Vanessa she could treat people that way. Begin with wages, breaks, schedules, the leaking floor, the clinic fees, the debt office. Begin where no one will thank you prettily. And you? I want opportunity, not charity. Then help me change it." She looked at him for a long moment. "With authority? With authority. Not as your grateful symbol, as my auditor." Something almost softened in her mouth, though not enough to become trust. "I will tell you when you are wrong. I am counting on it." Mara stirred. "Mama?" Elara brushed damp hair from her daughter's forehead. "I'm here." The girl blinked at Lucien. Children saw more directly than adults, perhaps, because no one had yet taught them how to decorate fear. "Are you the reason Mama cried in winter?" Lucien knelt slowly, so his face was lower than hers. "I am part of the reason." "Are you sorry?" "Yes." "What are you going to do?" It was the same question every kingdom should have asked its ruler before handing him a seal. "Listen first," Lucien said. "Then repair what I can. Then keep listening when repair is no longer dramatic." Mara considered him. "Mama says feeling bad is not the same as doing good. Your mother is right about many things I learned too late." Elara's eyes glimmered, but she did not look away. By dawn, Ravenscar House no longer glittered. It looked like what it was, a beautiful building held up by tired people. Lucien remained after the guests had gone, carrying chairs, wiping tables, and helping Robert stack bowls. No one knew how to command him, so they gave him the unpleasant tasks and pretended that was normal. He accepted each one. At sunrise, he followed Elara and Mara through streets still wet from rain. They lived above a shuttered bookbinder's shop in a room where the ceiling sloped, and the heat came from an iron stove patched twice over. A narrow table held Mara's schoolbooks, Elara's wage slips, and a jar of harbor flowers that had grown crooked toward the window. Elara opened a cupboard. Oats, rice, beans, tea wrapped in paper to keep the damp away, medicine bottles arranged by which could be delayed without immediate danger. "This is what a royal order looks like when it reaches the other end," she said. Lucien could not speak. Mara placed one small biscuit, saved from some earlier shift, on a chipped plate before him. "Guests get something sweet on cold nights." The echo nearly broke him. Elara saw it and looked away, not to spare him, but perhaps to spare herself the burden of his grief. Lucien touched the biscuit and understood that the final object of his lesson would not be a crown, a seal, or a sword. It would be this small, ordinary offering from a child who had learned generosity in a room where adults had left too little. "I will not forget," he said. Elara stood at the stove, tired beyond anger. "Forgetting is easy. Build something that remembers when you are busy." Lucien began by opening doors that had been kept closed for centuries because nobles preferred justice to arrive filtered through servants. He summoned dishwashers, cooks, laundresses, drivers, clerks, nurses, and debt runners to the lower court instead of the jeweled hall. When vampire lords complained that the smell of onions and wool offended the marble, Lucien moved the hearings to the kitchen yard and made the nobles stand there. Elara sat beside him, not below him. That detail became the first scandal. She wore her black waitress dress the first day because she owned nothing suitable for court. Vanessa would have called it humiliation. Elara made it evidence. Her notebook rested open on her knee, filled with lists from the staff corridor. Broken machines, unpaid minutes, schedule changes posted after midnight, clinic forms written in language sick humans could not understand, debt notices delivered with no explanation of appeal. Lucien listened. Listening, he learned, was not the same as waiting for one's turn to be wise. A dishwasher named Paul described washing through fever because missed shifts meant rent penalties. Mina showed her mother's clinic bill, and the extra fee marked night authorization, though no night doctor had seen them. A laundress revealed that burns from silver tablecloths were treated as clumsiness rather than workplace injury. Robert placed a stack of maintenance requests before the court so old they had yellowed at the corners. The kingdom receives quarterly safety reports, Lord Caspian said with irritation. Elara turned a page. The reports summarize management responses. They do not include worker complaints unless management chooses to attach them. That is standard procedure. That is a curtain. A murmur moved through the yard. Lucien looked at Caspian. Remove the curtain. By week's end, wages at Ravenscar House rose. Breaks were recorded and enforced. The service corridor floor was repaired. The dish machine was replaced. Employee meals became actual meals, not leftovers renamed as generosity. Vanessa lost supervisory authority pending investigation. Peter was required to greet every guest from the front register for a month with Elara watching. A punishment he seemed to consider worse than exile. But Elara did not allow Lucien to mistake first repairs for transformation. You are fixing what embarrassed you in one building, she said, as they reviewed accounts after midnight. The debt office remains. The Royal Debt Office occupied a narrow building near the old courthouse, all iron shelves and windows too high to see through. Human families entered it, with letters folded soft from worry. Vampires rarely entered at all, except to collect signatures that benefited estates on the ridge. Lucien arrived with Elara under a sky the color of pewter. Clerks bowed so quickly that ink splattered on 2 ledgers. Stand up, Elara said. Show us the inherited obligation files. The chief clerk, Mr. Alder, smiled as if his teeth had been trained. Those records are complex. Good, Elara replied. I read complex. They worked for hours beneath gas lamps that hissed like secrets. Elara's competence changed the air. She found duplicate fees buried under old names, debt notices sent to children, penalties added after accounts should have closed, and a pattern of relief funds redirected through Mason Vale's charities before reaching families already marked delinquent. At the bottom of one ledger page, she stopped. Lucien noticed her stillness. What is it? My father's account. The name Elara Venn sat between a dock worker and a seamstress. Beside it were charges for clinic care, housing arrears, and an old royal protection fee. Elara traced the ink without touching it. This says he owed the crown after the investigation closed. Did he? No. Mason's office promised all witnesses temporary protection before your order withdrew it. My father testified during the first inquiry. After funds vanished, the debt office billed him for the assistance he had already received. Mr. Alder adjusted his cuffs. Witness protections were voided retroactively. Lucien turned to him. By whose command? The clerk opened his mouth, then closed it. Elara reached for a lower shelf and pulled out a packet tied with gray ribbon. This ribbon marks court-authorized changes. Who authorized it? Alder moved too fast. Lucien caught his wrist before it reached the packet. No bones cracked, no blood spilled. The restraint took more strength than violence would have. Do not, Lucien said softly. Elara opened the packet. Inside lay a copy of Lucien's withdrawal order, Mason's memorandum, and a separate attachment bearing an old advisor seal. Thomas Wren's seal. Lucien stared at it. Thomas had been dead before the attachment date. For a moment the room receded. Thomas Wren had been the human advisor who taught Lucien that law without mercy became hunger in a cleaner coat. He had died suddenly during the scandal season. Lucien had grieved him, then signed whatever Mason placed before him because grief had made the world intolerable to read. Elara studied his face. Your advisor's seal was forged. Yes. Then Mason used your grief and his name. Lucien closed his eyes. The old wound opened differently now. It was no longer only loss. It was betrayal wearing the handwriting of duty. Alder whispered, I only processed what came from Treasury and charged grieving families for protection already promised, Elara said. He looked at her with resentment. You speak as if clerks rule kings. No, I speak as if clerks can harm poor people while kings look elsewhere. Lucien opened his eyes. Every retroactive witness debt tied to the relief trust is frozen. Every family receives notice of review in plain language. The appeals desk will be staffed by people not paid according to collections. Alder swallowed. That will disrupt the office. Good. Outside, wind pushed rain against the courthouse steps. Elara stood with the forged seal packet held tight against her chest. This is larger than Mason stealing funds, she said. Yes, he changed records after your advisor died. He made witnesses look indebted, then frightened them silent. Her breath caught, but she nodded. Lucien wanted to touch her shoulder. He did not. Want did not create permission. Instead, he held out his hand for the packet. Elara gave it to him after a pause. Do not bury Thomas Wren a second time. I will not. And do not use his betrayal to make yourself the injured center. The accuracy of the warning hurt. I will try not to. Try in writing. So he wrote an order on the courthouse steps with rain spotting the ink. The inquiry would include forged royal seals, retroactive debt charges, clinic diversions, and all decisions made under Lucien's authority during the scandal season. Elara made him add one sentence before signing. All affected human families shall have the right to testimony without penalty, retaliation, or debt collection during review. Lucien signed it in full. That night at Ravenscar House, Robert served soup in the staff room. Mara sat at the table doing homework while Elara reviewed copied ledgers. Lucien stood by the stove, unused to domestic warmth that did not belong to him and unwilling to disturb it. Mara looked up. Do kings ever have homework? More than they admit. Do they finish it? Elara did not look up. Some require supervision. Robert laughed into the soup. Lucien accepted the bowl Elara offered. Their fingers did not touch, but the space between them had changed, not healed, not forgiven into ease, changed enough that silence no longer felt only like accusation. It held work now. Later, when Mara slept in a chair beside the hearth, Elara spoke quietly. My father believed Thomas Wren would protect the witnesses. Thomas would have. Then we find who forged him. Lucien looked at her across the lamplit table. She was tired, poor, publicly wounded, and still thinking like an auditor rather than a victim waiting to be rescued. We, he repeated. Elara met his eyes. Do not mistake partnership for trust. I won't. Good. Trust comes after evidence. For the first time since the rain outside Ravenscar, Lucien smiled without bitterness. Then I will learn to be evidence. The forged seal led them to the sealed archive beneath Blackthorn Hall, where the royal court kept records it did not wish to destroy and did not wish to remember. The archive door stood behind a chapel wall carved with ravens, roses, and saints whose faces had been worn smooth by centuries of damp air. Only the king's blood could open it, though Lucien made sure the blood stayed symbolic, a silver pin, one drop, a lock that sighed like an old judge. Elara watched without fascination. Convenient. What is? A room that only opens for the person least likely to be questioned. Lucien looked at the dark stairs beyond the door. You have a talent for making architecture feel guilty. Architecture often helps. They descended with lanterns. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling, holding ledgers, land contracts, clinic charters, marriage registers, execution pardons, and correspondence tied with ribbons whose colors marked centuries of secrets. Dust softened every surface except the path Mason Vale's people had used. Elara saw it before Lucien did. Someone has been here recently. The archive cannot open without me. Then someone used what they forged. At the third aisle, they found Thomas Wren's section disturbed. Boxes had been opened and replaced carelessly. Elara pulled on gloves before touching anything. Lucien, who had once commanded armies with a thought, found himself obeying when she handed him a notebook and told him to write shelf numbers. You enjoy this, he said. Being correct, often. Ordering a king? I try not to take pleasure in obvious necessities. He almost laughed. The sound startled him. It had been years since anything in an archive had sounded alive. They worked until the lanterns burned low. Then Elara found the portrait. It was not large. A charcoal study tucked behind a clinic charter, protected by brown paper. Thomas Wren sat beside a younger man with Mason Vale's smile and a woman's hand resting on the back of Thomas's chair. The woman had Elara's eyes. Elara went still. That is my grandmother. Lucien took the portrait carefully. I knew her. You knew Elara Venn? Ada Bell before marriage. She served as Thomas's field clerk during the harbor fever. She could read a false inventory by the way a man breathed near it. No one told me. Thomas kept many human allies unnamed for their protection. Elara's voice hardened. Protection has a habit of looking like erasure after enough time. She turned the portrait over. On the back, in Thomas Wren's hand, was written, Ada holds the second key should the court forget mercy. Below the line sat a small mark stitched through the paper with silver thread. 3 tiny knots, the same pattern Elara used to repair torn napkins at Ravenscar House. My grandmother taught me that stitch, Elara whispered. She said it was for cloth that had to hold under strain. Lucien's expression changed. The second key was never metal. Elara opened her satchel and removed a handkerchief from her father's things. Along one edge ran the same 3 knots, nearly invisible, unless someone knew to look. She told my father it was just family mending. Thomas hid an archive index in human craft, Lucien said. Something vampires would ignore. Elara looked at the endless shelves. Then we need cloth records. They found them in a cedar chest labeled domestic accounts, napkins from royal clinics, aprons from winter kitchens, a torn banner from the First Marrow Relief Trust. Along their hems, Elara Venn had stitch patterns that matched box numbers, initials, and dates. The stitches led to a narrow drawer beneath the floor. Inside lay Thomas Wren's last memorandum. Lucien recognized the handwriting immediately and had to sit on the stair to read it. If this reaches Ada, then Mason Vale has succeeded in moving corruption beneath charitable language. He means to replace relief with debt and make witnesses repay the mercy that exposed him. I have warned the king, but grief approaches this court. Should I die before the inquiry, protect the human ledgers. They will prove that the stolen funds were not merely theft, but preparation for control. Elara read over Lucien's shoulder. Grief approaches this court. Thomas knew he was in danger. Did he warn you? Lucien swallowed the old pain. He tried. I was hunting treaty breaches in the north. His last letter reached me after his funeral. Elara lifted another page. This one bore names: Mason Vale, Chief Clerk Alder, 2 clinic directors, 3 noble donors, and Vanessa Vale listed as receiving payments for employee silence through Ravenscar House management. Vanessa was part of it, Elara said. Yes, she kept me desperate because desperate people are easier to discredit. The archive seemed colder around them. Lucien looked at the memorandum, then the stitched cloth, then Elara's hands, practical hands, scarred hands. Hands that had carried coffee to a disguised king and unknowingly carried the second key to a buried conspiracy. Your family protected the evidence that could clear you. Elara's laugh came out broken. My father died owing money created to punish him for telling the truth, while the proof sat under royal stone waiting for someone important enough to open a door. Lucien could not defend the door. I am sorry, he said. I know, that is not enough. No. They worked through the night copying documents. Lucien sent for court scribes. Elara did not trust them. Robert arrived before dawn with coffee, bread, and a second lantern. He was Ada Bell's grandson through another branch, which explained why the chef had guarded Elara's records with such stubborn quiet. Grandmother said our family had a duty to keep warm rooms open, Robert said, touching the stitched banner. I thought she meant soup. She did, Elara said, and this. By morning, they had proof that Mason's fraud was a surface wound over a deeper machinery. Relief funds had been diverted to create dependency. Witnesses were charged retroactively. Clinics denied medicine until families signed long-term obligations. Human workers in vampire-owned establishments were kept precarious so they could be pressured into silence. The system was not broken by accident. It had been tuned. Lucien stood in the archive doorway as dawn silvered the chapel stones. There will be a public hearing. Mason will attack first, Elara said. Yes, he will use me, my poverty, my dismissal, my daughter. He will say I bewitched you or that you are led by guilt. Then we prepare. No. Elara folded Thomas's memorandum and placed it beside the stitched handkerchief. Then I prepare. You prepare to let me speak. Lucien looked at her. I can protect you. Protection that requires my silence is just a prettier cage. The old vampire king felt the lesson land where centuries had made habit into instinct. He had imagined protecting her by standing between her and the court. But Elara was not asking to be hidden behind power. She was asking power to move aside far enough for truth to be seen. Then I will stand beside you, he said, and speak when you ask. She studied him, measuring whether the promise contained ownership. Beside is acceptable. They returned to Ravenscar House through the staff door. Because Elara insisted, evidence should enter by the same route as labor. Marrow waited in the break room, wrapped in Robert's spare coat, reading a schoolbook beneath a lamp that flickered less now that Lucien had ordered repairs. Elara showed her the stitched handkerchief. Your great-grandmother hid a key in this. Mara traced the 3 knots. It looks tiny. Important things often do before people know how to read them. Lucien remembered the honey biscuit on a chipped plate and felt the story shaping itself around small objects too humble for. Nobles to fear, coffee, cloth, ledgers, biscuits, a child's question. The empire Mason built had depended on powerful people, overlooking what humble people preserved. That evening, a sealed summons arrived at Ravenscar House. Mason Vale had petitioned the court for emergency censure against Elara Venn, accusing her of manipulating the king, stealing archive materials, and endangering the stability of vampire-human agreements. The hearing would be held at the Winter Gala before nobles, donors, clerks, and chosen human representatives. Mara read the summons twice. Can they take Mama away? Elara knelt in front of her. They can try to frighten us. Are you frightened? Yes. Mara leaned forward and whispered same words Elara had once given Mina. Breathe slowly. Elara closed her eyes and obeyed her daughter. Lucien turned away to give them privacy. In the window's dark reflection, his eyes shone red above the staff room table. A king, a waitress, a child, a chef, a stitched key, and a dead advisor's warning. It did not look like enough to confront a court built on centuries of appetite. But then Elara stood, folded the summons, and placed it beside her notebook. We attend, she said. The suspended ache in the room changed into anticipation. The winter gala at Blackthorn Hall had always pretended to be charity. Every year, nobles arrived in velvet and diamonds to fund kitchens they never visited, clinics whose waiting rooms they never smelled, and debt forgiveness ceremonies designed to forgive only those obligations that should never have existed. Music floated beneath the vaulted ceiling, while human servants moved through the crowd like shadows trained not to interrupt beauty. This year, the beauty felt armed. Elara entered through the front doors in a charcoal gown Robert's sister had altered from an old court dress. Along the cuffs ran 3 tiny knots of silver thread. She wore no jewels except her father's watch on a ribbon at her throat. Mara walked beside her in a navy coat, carrying a small satchel of copied records because she had refused to wait at home. Lucien met them at the foot of the stairs. He wore black without ornament, his white hair loose against his shoulders, his crown absent by deliberate choice. Elara noticed. No crown? Tonight the evidence should sit higher than I do. Good answer. Mara peered up at him. Did Mama help you with it? Your mother has improved most of my answers. For a moment, the 3 of them almost looked like people arriving at a celebration, rather than a trial disguised as one. Then Mason Vale stepped into view, surrounded by advisors, donors, and clerks who had survived for years by knowing where power planned to stand. Miss Venn, he said, how brave to bring your child to witness your second disgrace. Elara's hand tightened once around Mara's, then released. Mara witnesses the truth in our family that has frightened you for years. Mason smiled. We shall see. The hearing began beneath the rose window. Lady Evelyn presided with 2 vampire elders and a human magistrate from the harbor district. Mason spoke first because men like him often arranged rooms around the music of their own voices. He described Elara as unstable, ambitious, resentful after losing her position. He called Lucien grief-stricken and vulnerable to manipulation. He suggested the king's guilt had been exploited by a woman eager to restore her status. He held up the archive copies and called them theft. He held up Elara's waitress uniform, somehow obtained from Ravenscar House, and called it proof of her fall. A person reduced to service may become desperate, Mason said. Desperation breeds invention. Whispers moved through the hall. Elara stood. Lucien's instinct rose to shield her. He kept still. I did become desperate, she said. I was desperate to keep my father alive when promised witness protection became debt. I was desperate to feed my daughter after my name was ruined for reporting theft. I was desperate enough to carry trays in a room where corrupt men laughed at me. But desperation did not teach me to invent records. It taught me to keep them. She opened her notebook. Her voice did not shake when she began. She showed the false clinic invoice, the Fell Street delivery to a building already closed. She showed witness debts created after Lucien's withdrawal order. She showed Mason's shell charities. Robert testified about the duplicate records Elara had given him. Mina spoke, softly but clearly, about medicine fees tied to the same relief accounts. A laundress described Vanessa's payments for silence. Peter, sweating through his collar, admitted the reservation book had been used to hide poor guests and impress donors. Mason objected to every witness until Lady Evelyn told him objection was not a broom. Then Elara placed the stitched handkerchief before the court. Laughter flickered at the edge of Mason's supporters. A charming textile, Mason said. Elara turned to the gallery. My grandmother Elara Venn worked with Thomas Wren during the harbor fever. Because human records were often destroyed when they became inconvenient, she hid archive references in repair stitches. The pattern on this handkerchief led us to Thomas Wren's final memorandum. She held up the memorandum. The hall changed. Thomas Wren's name still carried weight among older vampires, not because he had been powerful, but because he had been right too often for comfort. Lucien stepped forward only when Elara nodded. I verify the handwriting, he said. I verify the seal on the archive drawer. And I verify that the attachment Mason used to justify retroactive debts bears Thomas Wren's seal after Thomas was dead. Mason's face hardened. The king admits he was deceived and seeks a scapegoat. No, Lucien said. The king admits he was negligent and seeks the truth. Elara took back the floor. Mason Vale did not merely steal from charity. He built a system where mercy became debt. Families received help, then later learned the help had been converted into obligation. Witnesses were billed for protection. Workers were kept frightened. Clinics denied medicine until signatures were obtained. My father died believing he had burdened me because a clerk handed him a debt created from his own testimony. The human magistrate leaned forward. Can you prove the conversion of witness protection into debt? Elara opened Mara's satchel and removed the gray ribbon packet. Page by page, she made the court read its own machinery. Alder's authorization, Mason's memorandum, Vanessa's payments, clinic signatures, donor seals. Each document became a stone removed from a wall everyone had called permanent. At last, Mason lost patience. Enough, he snapped. Even if mistakes were made, this woman had no right to enter royal archives.
Waitress.
Mara stepped forward before Elara could stop her. My mother is an auditor. The hall went very quiet. Mason looked down at the child with contempt. Little girl, you do not understand court function. I understand when grown people use big words because the small ones sound bad. A ripple moved through the human side of the gallery. Even Lady Evelyn's stern mouth twitched. Mara reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the honey biscuit she had saved from Ravenscar, wrapped carefully in paper. When the king came to our room, I gave him this because guests get something sweet on cold nights. Mama taught me that. She taught people dignity when your rules taught them fear. Elara whispered Mara. But the child held the biscuit out toward the court like evidence of a different law. If Mama was only a waitress, then why did she remember what kings forgot? The question did what ledgers alone could not. It made the room feel the distance between service and servility, between poverty and worth, between a title taken and a truth kept alive by a woman carrying coffee. Lucien looked at Mason. Answer her. Mason could not. Lady Evelyn ordered the final memorandum read aloud. Thomas Wren's warning filled the hall. Relief turned into debt, witnesses punished, mercy converted into control. By the end, Mason stood alone in a widening circle. One donor withdrew support. A clinic director asked for counsel. Alder attempted to leave and found the doors held shut by royal guards. Elara faced to Mason. The years he had stolen seemed to stand behind her. Not as weakness, but as witnesses. You wanted me reduced to a uniform, she said. You forgot uniforms have pockets. We carry what you overlook. The court voted before midnight. Mason Vale was removed, detained for trial, and stripped of access to treasury records. All relief trust witness debts were voided pending full restitution. Clinic accounts were frozen for review. Workers who testified received protection by royal decree, written this time in language Mara could read. The hall did not applaud. Applause would have made justice feel too clean. After the ruling, Lucien found Elara on a balcony overlooking the harbor lights. The cold did not trouble him, but he noticed her shiver and offered his coat without stepping closer. She accepted after a pause. You let me speak, she said. You told me to. Many men hear instructions as suggestions when power makes them inconvenient. I am learning to hear better. Below, Mara was showing Robert the biscuit, apparently explaining its courtroom significance with great seriousness. Lucien looked at Elara's profile, at the tiredness around her eyes, and the strength that had not needed his admiration to exist. I would like to continue beside you. She did not pretend not to understand. As king, as whatever you permit me to be while I repair what my crown damaged. Repair is not courtship. No, gratitude is not love. No, and protection is not ownership. Lucien bowed his head. I know that now, or I am beginning to. Elara held his coat closed against the wind. Then begin with tomorrow. We have restitution tables to build. It was not a yes. It was not a no. For Lucien, who had spent decades being obeyed instantly and loved only in songs written by people who feared him, the space between those answers felt honest enough to be sacred. Restitution did not arrive like dawn. It arrived like winter work. Slow, inconvenient, repetitive, and impossible to romanticize after the first announcement. Lucien discovered that a kingdom could vote for justice in a dramatic night and resist it in 100 quiet mornings. Clerks misplaced forms. Nobles requested exemptions. Clinic directors blamed predecessors. Donors offered public sympathy and private delay. Elara expected all of it. She built tables so clear that lies had fewer places to sit. Every affected family received a plain language notice. Every debt office file had to be matched against original relief records. Every clinic denial required a named human reviewer. She created a witness desk, staffed by people who had once stood in the wrong line themselves, because humiliation, properly transformed, could become expertise. Lucien gave her office space in Blackthorn Hall. She moved the desk to the former storage room beside the public entrance. People looking for help should not have to pass 3 portraits and a guard before they can ask a question, she said. The room is small, so were our apartments. Mara did homework at the corner table some evenings while Elara worked late. Robert sent food from Ravenscar in covered bowls and claimed he had made too much, a lie so consistent it became affection. Mina joined the clinic review team after her mother's case was corrected. Peter became surprisingly good at greeting cold. Wet strangers once fear had made him practice humility long enough for habit to form. Vanessa's investigation revealed payments, threats, and letters from Mason instructing her to keep Elara unstable. underpaid, and visibly low. When confronted, Vanessa cried about pressure from her family. Elara listened without expression. "Pressure explains direction," she said. "It does not erase choice." Lucien remembered the sentence. Mason's trial took months. Vampires measured time differently, but humans did not, and Elara made sure the court calendar respected mortal rent, sickness, and childcare. She testified without trembling. Mara did not attend every session, only the final one, when Mason's network of false debts, stolen relief, and forged seals was laid before the court in full. At sentencing, Mason looked older, as if public disbelief had fed him and truth had stopped the meal. "You think this restores what you lost?" he asked Elara. "No," she said. "That is why it is justice, not magic." He was sentenced to imprisonment in a daylight tower where no noble visitor could arrive after dark with favors hidden in sleeves. His assets were seized for restitution. Alder and the clinic directors faced their own penalties. The court recorded Thomas Wren's memorandum publicly, and Elara Venn's stitched code was added to the archive under her true name. On the day Elara's reputation was formally restored, Lucien expected the court to hold a ceremony. Elara refused. "My name was not taken in a ceremony." "Then how would you like it returned?" She went to Mara's school. Lucien waited across the street, under a leafless tree, while Elara asked the office to call her daughter into the hall. Through the window he saw Mara appear with a pencil still in her hand. Elara gave her the official letter. Mara read the first lines and dropped her backpack. She threw her arms around her mother. Later Elara told Lucien what Mara had said. "I already knew." Those 3 words healed nothing fully, but they touched a place no court ruling could reach. Lucien began changing laws that had seemed eternal, mostly because no one with power had suffered under them. Retroactive mercy debts were abolished. Relief grants could not convert into private obligation. Worker complaints bypassed managers. Clinic fees required public review. Human advisors gained voting authority on mixed courts. Every royal document affecting wages, medicine, housing, or debt had to answer 4 questions before reaching Lucien's desk. Who is affected? Who was consulted? What happens if this fails? Who benefits if no one reads it? Elara wrote the questions. Lucien framed them beside his seal. Their relationship moved with the same restraint as the reforms. He walked her home when invited. He remained outside when not. He learned Mara's favorite harbor stories and never used gifts to purchase ease. When Elara was tired, he did not tell her to rest as if command could become care. He asked which burden could be carried and accepted when she said none. One evening, snow began over Baltimore while they worked in the public office. Mara had fallen asleep over a geography page. The stove clicked softly. Elara rubbed her wrist where long writing had made it ache. Lucien placed a cup of chicory coffee beside her, with 1 honey biscuit on the saucer. She looked at it. "You remembered. I am trying to build things that remember when I am busy." Elara's face shifted. For a moment, all the guarded rooms inside her seemed lit from within by a candle she had not expected to find burning. "That was a good answer, teacher." Severe she sounds necessary. She is. Silence settled, warm rather than empty. Lucien did not reach for her hand. Elara looked at his still fingers and understood the restraint for what it was. Not distance, but respect wearing patience. After a long moment, she placed her hand beside his on the table. "Not touching. Beside, I am not ready to be loved by a king," she said. Lucien's voice was low. "Then I will not ask as a king. What would you ask as?" "As Lucien, a man who has done harm, learned late, and wishes to become someone whose presence does not cost you peace." The snow tapped the window. Elara let her smallest finger rest against his. It was barely contact. For a vampire king accustomed to oaths sworn in bloodless halls, it felt more binding than any treaty. "Become that first," she said. "I will." Months passed. Ravenscar House changed until returning guests complained that the staff looked too comfortable. Robert called that the highest compliment the kitchen had ever received. The hidden table behind the column remained, but it was no longer used to shame poor guests. Elara turned it into the house's warmth table, reserved for anyone caught in bad weather who needed coffee, soup, or a place to sit without being measured. Peter hated the idea for 2 days. Then he became proud of it. Lucien visited often, sometimes as king, sometimes as himself in an ordinary coat. He no longer disguised poverty as theater. When he wanted to know how people were treated, he asked them and believed the answer enough to investigate. The largest project began with a photograph Elara placed on his desk. The building above the shuttered bookbinder's shop where she and Mara had survived the worst years. "Buy it?" Lucien asked. "Not to erase it, to repair it. To make sure the next family who lives there has heat that works before a child learns how to hide shivering." They named it Second Harbor because Mara said, "A harbor should be where people stop drowning." The building took nearly a year, wiring replaced, roof mended, stairs rebuilt, apartments warmed. A pantry opened on the ground floor. A small office offered debt counseling, clinic navigation, and translation of court notices into language ordinary people could understand. Elara insisted the rents remain affordable by law, not goodwill. Lucien wrote the protection so tightly that even a future king in grief would have to read it twice. On opening day, families gathered in the courtyard under pale spring sun. Reporters waited. Nobles attended because public conscience had become fashionable again. Lucien carried a speech in his pocket and forgot every word when he saw Elara kneeling before a little boy, telling him there was no mistake. The apartment was truly his family's now. Mara stood beside the doorway holding a plate of honey biscuits. "For guests," she told anyone who asked. Lucien looked at the biscuits, the repaired stairs, Elara's silver stitches on her cuff, and the harbor light beyond the roofs. The final echo had returned, not as guilt alone, but as memory transformed into shelter. The courtyard at Second Harbor quieted after the speeches, after the reporters folded their tripods, after the nobles departed in carriages, polished enough to reflect their improved consciences. Families carried boxes upstairs. Children chose corners for beds. Someone laughed when the new radiator warmed too quickly and filled the room with the dusty smell of first heat. Lucien remained near the gate, uncertain whether to enter the building. A year earlier, he would have walked anywhere he pleased. Now he understood that repaired places still held memories that did not belong to him. Elara found him there with her father's watch at her throat and flower on one sleeve from helping Robert arrange food. "You look like a man waiting for permission." "I am." "Good. Come upstairs." She led him to the apartment where she and Mara had once lived. It had been painted a soft blue-gray. The window no longer leaked. The stove had been replaced. The ceiling still sloped, but now it felt charming in the way hardship sometimes does only after danger has been removed. Mara stood inside with a small box. "We left something," she said. Behind the place where the old bed had stood, the workers had preserved a rectangle of original wall. On it, in faded pencil, was a drawing of a woman and a girl holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Underneath, in childish letters, were the words, "Bad days leave. Love stays." Lucien read them once, then again. Elara touched the wall lightly. "Mara drew it after a winter night when I thought she was asleep. I had cried in the washroom because I did not know how to stretch rice into 2 meals. The next morning, I found this." Mara shifted, embarrassed. "It was not a very good son. It was an excellent son," Lucien said. "You are only saying that because you are old and sentimental. Both charges are fair." Elara laughed softly. The sound filled the room more completely than any renovation. The new tenant, a widow named Helen Price, had asked to keep the drawing uncovered. She said her grandchildren should know that someone had survived hard years there before them and left instructions on the wall. Lucien thought of all the royal archives beneath Blackthorn Hall, all the records guarded by bloodlocks and old stone. None of them had ever told the truth more plainly. Bad days leave, love stays. Outside, the opening day continued in fragments of ordinary life. Robert argued with the stove. Mina helped an elderly man fill out a clinic form. Peter held the door for a dock worker with a sleeping toddler. Lady Evelyn spoke with human tenants without wearing pity like perfume. The system was not healed beyond danger, but it had been made answerable. That mattered. Lucien and Elara stepped into the small hallway while Mara helped Helen's grandchildren choose biscuits. "I owe you an answer," Elara said. Lucien grew still. "To what question?" "The one you have been careful not to keep asking." He looked at her then, at the woman who had served him coffee when he was disguised, accused him when he was revealed, corrected him when he tried to repair too beautifully, and stood beside him until the court learned to hear the human voice it had trained itself to ignore. "You owe me nothing," he said. "I know. That is why I can answer." Her hand found the watch at her throat. "I was afraid that loving you would make my pain useful to your story." The ruined waitress forgiven by the noble king. The poor woman lifted because he noticed her. "I hated that version before anyone told it. So did I. But that is not what happened. No, you did not save me from having no voice. You finally stood where my voice could not be dismissed." Lucien felt the old ache of centuries, loneliness wrapped around restraint, loosened by one careful thread. Elara continued. "I do not love your crown. I still mistrust parts of it. I do not love your guilt, though it made you listen. I do not love the power that hurt my family, even when that power now tries to mend. But I have come to love the man who learned to wait outside doors." Lucien closed his eyes. For a vampire, hunger was ancient. It taught taking, keeping, returning to what warmed the dark. But this feeling asked the opposite of him. It asked him to receive without grasping, to be chosen without claiming, to understand that patience was not the road to possession but a form of love itself. "Elara," he said, voice unsteady in a way no court had heard. "I am not finished." He opened his eyes at once. "Of course, Mara and I remain ourselves. Our home remains ours. My work remains mine. If we build anything together, it must have doors I can open from the inside. Yes. If you forget how power sounds to people without it, I will remind you, please. And if grief comes again, you read before you sign." That almost broke the solemnity between them. Lucien laughed, low and helpless. Elara smiled. "I love you," she said. The words did not fall like destiny. They arrived like something earned through winter mornings, corrected ledgers, soup in staff rooms, and a child's biscuit held up before a court. Lucien did not touch her until she reached for him. When she did, he took her hand as if it were both fragile and strong enough to change a kingdom, because it was. His skin was cool, hers was warm. Neither temperature conquered the other. They stood that way in the hallway while life moved around them. Later, near sunset, Lucien addressed the courtyard without the speech in his pocket. He told the gathered families that Second Harbor had been built because a waitress treated a disguised stranger with dignity, because a child asked what adults avoided, because an old chef hid records behind flour bins, because a grandmother stitched truth where power would not look, and because a kingdom learned too late that mercy must never become debt. Then he said what advisors had begged him to omit. "My signature harmed Elara Venn's family. My ignorance protected corruption. I cannot return the years lost to that harm. I can only let the truth govern what I do next." No one applauded immediately. The pause was uncomfortable and therefore honest. Then Helen Price clapped once, not for the confession but perhaps for the refusal to polish it. Others joined. Elara watched from the doorway with Mara beside her, and Lucien understood that peace was not being admired. Peace was no longer hiding from the cost of being known. When evening settled, the three of them walked toward the harbor. Mara carried the last honey biscuit in a paper wrap. She broke it into 3 pieces without asking whether kings ate from children's hands. "Guests get something sweet on cold nights," she said. "It is not cold," Elara said. "It was when this started." Lucien accepted his piece. The biscuit tasted of honey, flour, and memory. Once, Elara had placed one beside his coffee because she noticed a stranger shivering. Later, Mara had offered one in a poor apartment because dignity was the only wealth no one had stolen from them. In court, the biscuit had become proof that service could contain a moral law higher than status. Now it was simply shared between people who knew what it had cost to arrive at simplicity. At the railing, boats moved across the darkening water. Harbor lights blurred into gold again, but Lucien saw them differently. Behind every light, a room. Behind every room, a life. Behind every life, some policy, door, wage, form, kindness, insult, or signature that either made the night colder or helped someone endure it. For years, he had believed character was something a king tested in others. A rude host, a cruel manager, a flattering treasurer, a frightened clerk. Each had seemed to reveal what people were when no reward waited. Elara taught him a harder truth. Character was also what a person did after discovering the harm inside his own name. Regret alone was not goodness. Guilt alone was not repair. A powerful man could feel sorry forever and still leave the leaking corridor unrepaired. Change began when remorse moved from the heart into habits, reading before signing, asking who had been consulted, listening to the worker behind the door, believing the woman everyone profited by calling bitter, protecting testimony without owning the witness, and building institutions that remembered ordinary people when rulers were tired. Elara learned something too, though she spoke of it less. Forgiveness was not pretending the injury had not happened. It was refusing to let Mason Vale, or Lucien's signature, or the hungry winters decide the borders of her future. She forgave without excusing. She loved without surrendering. She allowed justice to restore her name, but she did not make revenge her home. Mara leaned against the railing between them. Elara smoothed a hand over her hair. Some leave, some visit, but they do not get to live in every room. Lucien looked at the child, then at Elara. "Love stays?" Mara smiled. "If people take care of it." The vampire king, who had ruled through fear, treaties, hunger, and grief, found no law wiser than that. Behind them, Ravenscar House opened its doors for the evening. The hidden table behind the column waited with coffee, soup, and biscuits for anyone caught in rain. The staff corridor floor no longer leaked. The dead office windows had been lowered so people inside could see the street. In Blackthorn Hall, Elara Venn's stitched key rested beside Thomas Wren's memorandum, both labeled in full. And on Lucien's desk, framed beside the withdrawal order bearing his signature, hung Mara's crooked son, Bad Days Leave, Love Stays. He read both before signing anything. That was how the story survived becoming legend. Not because a disguised king ordered coffee, not because a waitress spoke 3 words that froze him in shock, but because after the shock passed, he listened long enough for those words to become a kingdom's turning point.